All right, so today I want to talk about this number 15, which as it's represented here belongs to this plural noun, subscribers, and functions as a numerical and adjectival descriptive enhancer, designating a quantity or number of subscribers, but as a sign, and this number 15 certainly exceeds in complexity what we could describe as a space-time travel communication coordinate number for a number of reasons, and one of those reasons would be the significance of the word subscriber, and all of the branches that word describe, from its etymology to potential metaphorical interpretations of the word. You see the word scribe is in the word, and then sub as in subset or beneath, and the word is extremely complicated, both in relationship to space-time travel communication coordinate communications, and to the way that a contract in Phi through Theta's YouTube channel is organized in terms of playlists as interlocking sets, and these sets, in certain ways function as chapters, and in certain ways function as windows through which sets and aspects of von Neumann multiverses, I suppose, because they really begin to exceed universes, can be interpreted as acts of communication in relationship to all kinds of designations and types of space travel machines, and so this word, subscribers, belongs to a lot of interlocking sets of interpretation that even all of the metaphors that we have for the two sets of lists, of playlists, the complex list that represents 40 sets of sets, right, of organized musical albums, and some singles and additional material as well, and the so-called simple set that has multiple metaphors related to the value 360. But even all of those multiple metaphors, can't entirely account for what's going on in this designator, subscribers. And subscribers, if you even just take the simple, division of the word into the sub and the scribers, the hypotactical reference that being beneath or under some kind of designator or banner or heading defines, and the idea of scribe or writer, even that simple division or cutting of the word, or caesura of the word into sub and scribe, and then the plural ending, significantly undermines, this notion of a passive audience that is simply, the receiver, right, of a message, because as a subscribe, this idea is conveyed that one is a part of the work of the writing, and in some ways, there is no writing, right? Because the writing is the light, through which you receive the text, and even excuse me, even when there is writing, it's not conventional writing on a page, but it's digital writing, and that distinction might seem trivial, here as I hold the camera to these words, which are still relatively clear. But the closer that I get to these words, the more obvious it becomes that they're written, in a materiality that belongs to this digital dimension. And if I scroll up a bit, you see that more clearly in the way that this writing, which began, perhaps as a conventional or traditional form of writing somewhere, once it was placed into this digital space, the framework of this communication network, right? Yeah, or we've often talked about Roman Jakobson's various organizations of what a communication, what a message is. And I've argued that contact, although often thought of as a static materiality, right, like a piece of paper or a book, but really the contact and its root, to the receiver is always an instance or segment, a duration in space-time, the length of the life of the book, the route that the book took to get where it is, and so these materialities in a post-Einsteinian universe are much more complicated than we may imagine them to be, and the work here, takes into account or attempts to take into account all of those material features of each aspect, right? I'm going to argue that each aspect of the relationship between the sender of a message and the receiver of a message has its own materiality, and that all of those interlocking relations of materialities, can become part of the system of communication, and in so doing, we can complicate the notion of what a metacommunicative act, is or might be. And so you notice I've just complicated the metacommunicative act of the material universe here by betraying, in a certain sense, the source of light in the space in which I'm talking, which exists, behind me, somewhere over my head, and perhaps over my head is also a figural expression that signifies, beyond what this light means as a material object, and points towards yet another metaphor or allegory of the overhead, and what that could possibly mean. And here I can utilize that light as an index, right? I can point to whatever I wish to point to. I can point to the medicine wheel, and I can point to my dance tool, and I can point to home. I can point to, I'm careful enough, I can point to each of the individual letters that compose the word home, and I can point to the number 15, which I've argued is a more complicated signon, than say the 4 that exists down here, or the 88 that exists here, even though the 88 is a fairly complicated signon, of its own, because it represents the atomic number of the element radium, and because radium is a reference to so many things, but as the atomic number for radium, it has a relationship to Madame Curie, who misunderstood and misinterpreted the significant dangers of and health hazards that radium represented. And even though radium continues to be used in treatments of cancer, it's actually quite a destructive material that is historically its misunderstanding and its use, right? It's put into it. The act of having put it into play as a material for generating capital, using it as a paint that women were exploited to in their labor to paint onto the dials of these watches and various other sundry trinkets and baubles that had a certain curiosity and novelty, and that destroyed these women, right? But that created an impetus for regulating some of the dangers, the health dangers that workers faced in various industries, and that is part of labor history, right? And then that whole complex set of historical significance that this number 88 holds is also it's reflected in a poem that Mina Loy writes about Gertrude Stein. So one poet writing about another that is arguably a metapoetic act in and of itself, in which she refers to the works of Stein as a kind of radium of the word, and perhaps wishing to explore the luminosity and the idea of this radiating out, this power or this energy, the shooting forth from these isolated static forms into a larger and more dynamic universe. But whether Mina Loy understood the significance of the dangers of this materiality and its potential harm, is also part of the mystery of understanding, I suppose, her use of the word radium in describing Stein, and then perhaps we can see in it, if we turn the number sideways, two symbols of infinity stacked on top of one another, if we transform it into to letters, it represents a double H, which may or not have some kind of neo-fascist significance. I'm not entirely versed in crypto-fascism, and I don't know when and how and where and why to subscribe to all of the urban legends about the way that neo-fascist crypto symbolism works, and in any case, the fascists are so bold these days that I hardly see why that they would even need to worry about hiding this, since they hide absolutely nothing else anymore. They're so unashamed of their malignancy and violence and pathological desire to demonize anything that isn't like themselves. But there's also in this number and the use of the word radium in contemporary volume, a reference to the materiality of the sign, different kinds of signum, and so that becomes interesting as well, and it is perhaps also a reference to the name of a certain post-structural filmmaker. Structural film, being the specific designation that was given to a kind of experimental filmmaking that didn't necessarily, utilize found footage, but might utilize found footage. But in a certain sense, the world that composed the materiality that went into this film was always in one way or another found, rather than lyricized or embedded in representation as an acting out, right? Like what would say non-theater, or the theater of the world became open to formal investigation and organization in ways that are certainly similar to conceptual poetics, if not identical to it, and which I've argued that was going on for a long time in the complex understanding, at least, of what jazz music could do. And that's there in Eric Dolphy and John Coltrane. It's certainly there in Ornette Coleman and others as well. But that makes this number interesting, and it makes it interesting in connection between what we can make of what the number represented for Mina Loy in relationship to Stein, and what the number might mean in relationship to our understanding of this filmmaker, whose initials begin with H and H, and so this number is clearly complicated in terms of the all of the branches of signification that it reaches out to, and then that it was placed here, the doubling of the 8, where we have the doubling of the omission, right? The Greek word for ellipsis is well, etymologically, it represents this idea of an omission or something left out. So the idea of this, double omission that begins with the letter E, and of course EE is important in our space-time travel communication coordinates for various reasons as well. But I mean, all mark like a network, right? A maze or labyrinth of significations around these types of relationships. And this number 4, perhaps is significant enough, but not as elaborately evolved and involved in these various materialities of communication that we see here, right? All right. The way that I want to read the number 15 today is perhaps significantly more complicated than the descriptive and in some sense, narrating, if not narrative, reading that I'm giving the 88 here. And there's still, of course, so much that I'm omitting in the narrating reading or the narrative reading that I'm giving this number, and that perhaps necessarily needs to remain omitted for a variety of reasons, and all of those omissions are referred to, right? Both around the Greek word for ellipses, and here and here and here, the three designated ellipses by ... and in the word itself, and perhaps within the word itself, and what each of the letters that the word is composed of might represent in and of themselves, and in what the capitalization of the Greek letter E might represent, and what the doubling of each of these specific letters might represent. But this number begins with a different, well, it doesn't begin with a different story, but the way that I want to tell the story of this number 15 and its subscribers is somewhat different. And we began in a certain way, by looking at Bob Dylan's attempt to get to a marker or a point of communication, designated by Jimi Hendrix's version on the album Electric Ladyland of Bob Dylan's song, which is a kind of ballad and is also a kind of sonnet, and so it brings the ballad and sonnet together in a certain strange sort of way, but Bob Dylan's attempt to get to this song and say something about this song, and getting to this song involved getting to the number 15, because in our complex set of space-time travel communication coordinate playlists, the number 15 designates Jimi Hendrix in that set. He's the 15th among those complex playlists, and in large part those complex playlists are chosen and defined by those artists who represent a large number of individual individual playlists in my music set, and the reasons that they represent large numbers is complex, and it exceeds taste. Although in general, I have more albums and other kinds of playlists by individuals, whom I like the work of than those whom I don't like. But it's not, it's not an exclusive matter of taste, the way that it might be for some, right? And there may be other significances. And then there are artists within those sets whose lives and meanings and understandings to me, are more significant than others. And Jimi Hendrix occupies this place of exceptional significance, as does Eric Dolphy. And although their stories aren't the same in a certain sense, the importance of their representation in these playlists and sets are very similar. Both are individuals that Artaud uses the expression in his beautiful essay on Van Gogh, suicided by society. In Hendrix's case, that applies. In Dolphy's case, Dolphy was, not suicided by society, but simply murdered by society. And I've yet I think, I've yet to really talk about the life history of Eric Dolphy and his death, which in some ways, if it's even possible, is even more tragic than the death of Jimi Hendrix. And I can already feel that I'm losing my ability to speak of it, which is perhaps one of the reasons why we have yet to do a piece on the death of Eric Dolphy, and that has remained in abeyance, or is a kind of ellipsis, and certainly a different kind of ellipsis than is referred to here, right, in relationship to the two figures that are referred to here as being omitted domain, right, among those who have a place somewhere, but perhaps there will come a time when those talks can be given, and I can begin to approach my understanding of Eric Dolphy's death in the way that I have begun to talk about my understanding of Jimi Hendrix's death. For the purposes of this discussion, we're not going to go there. But I want to begin with understanding this number 15 begin with why it might be that Bob Dylan was so interested in making a reference to this song All Along the Watchtower, and drawing attention to it, via this number 15, and what I really want to do, today in exploring the number 15 and its relationship to this as a modifier of this noun, subscribers, is explore, Bob Dylan's attempt to communicate some kind of message via the reference to Hendrix as the number 15, and what that might mean, and why this particular song, all along the Watchtower, and so in a certain sense, I want to do a reading of Bob Dylan's letter, his it wasn't an apology, certainly the first letter in which he unsubscribed or desubscribed, and there may have been unconscious motivation in Bob Dylan's act of unsubscribing, right, that weren't weren't readily apparent in in the initial moment of that involved his take on reading William Blake in this way and drawing attention to the way that his song, The Gates of Eden, the B-side of Like a Rolling Stone, right, drew from this sort of mystical visionary imagination, and perhaps Blake, if not Blake, certainly familiar verses from the Hebrew holy books, and certain references to culturally familiar symbols of both what gates and entrances might mean, and what Edens and meadows and paradises and various symbols of both pre-experiential innocence and the post-visionary beyond might mean, and how they're utilized across multitudes of forms of literature. But what was missing in that initial letter, that Hedgehog read, and that begins to become clearer as we move toward his recognition of wanting to make another attempt to signify this number 15, which he initially failed to do for whatever reason, whether it belonged to confusion around the secret life of 14 states, and whoever might have, whoever else, in addition to Bob Dylan and his attempt to clarify this number, might be attempting to clarify a relationship to that, or to distance themselves from a relationship to that. I had on one of the few publications of my work, two very different, incorrect interpretations and comments upon the work, but incorrect in two very different ways, and one of the interpreters of the work and commenters on the work wanted to distance himself from the other commenter, and the only rationale for doing so was that his blurb was right next to this other blurb, so proximity in space, right? So Bob Dylan's attempt to get to this number 15, and whoever else might be involved in the subscribing and desubscribing or unsubscribing process, become more complicated in terms of set theory and motivations, and the randomization of the influence of one act upon another act, and what it might signify, right? In other words, when we were down to 14 subscribers, Bob Dylan, even though ostensibly in his initial letter he described wanting to move away from having a relationship as a sub-writer of this text, and cited personal reasons for doing so. There may have been unconscious motivation in doing so, right? Now, the ostensible rationale for either the 15th, right, subscriber that we lost at one point and when we got down to 14 might have been totally different. The rationale, the surface rationale, might have been totally different, and then the unconscious or subconscious rationale, beneath that, again, could have been totally different. And so getting to 14, it could be marked by, both multiple acts signons, right? Like the acts themselves are completely different, right? And so say describe them as occurrences, right? So the occurrences themselves are not a result of a cause, or not the process of a cause and effect, right? That's necessarily parallel or necessarily in keeping with the same set of significative values. Then, beyond that, like the unconscious determining motivations lying beneath each of those sets of occurrence could be entirely differently framed, right? And have different sets of unconscious and subconscious motivations, and that's in some way what I want to look at here and try to clarify in relationship to just this single entity of Bob Dylan, what this number 15 could possibly mean. But to do so, I have to expand out of Dylan's justification in the first and second set of letters, and look at a few other things. And one of the things that we're going to look at are all of those things that are unstated, and let's take a look at the representation of the first stanza of a verse of All Along the Watchtower, this communication coordinate that Bob Dylan was trying to get to, and point to something that's often omitted, or often an example of a kind of ellipsis in readings of Hendrick's version, and in readings of understanding of the difference, and what's often pointed to about the differences is the replacement of the long guitar solo replaces the harmonica, and the way that certain kinds of emphases are provided in Hendrick's version, and the pace, the speed, he increases the pace and the speed of the song, and but what's often neglected is that there's a point in the poem in which he changes the lyric content, and maybe people don't notice that, or they don't want to talk about it, but it's here in the first verse, and so the first verse reads, and I won't read it the way Hedgehog would in the voice of Bob Dylan, but I'll just read it somewhat in the manner of Michael McClure reading Jim Morrison, but I won't necessarily be reading it as an oversimplification of William Blake, because I don't think it is necessarily, and and the transformation that I'm interested in doesn't really belong to that semantic field. So the lyrics here are there must be some way out of here, and this of course is this is a line, and then Bob Dylan lets us know that it's a line, and it's being spoken by the Joker, and so the Joker is the addresser and the thief, and of course those are symbolic values, and they may refer to symbols in the tarot in a certain way, and they clearly relate. The Joker clearly is some form or version of the Fool, and the thief variously could represent the king as the owner, right? Corporate America or whatever. This idea of the propertied one is always the thief, right? Because how did he get his property? He had to steal it, or perhaps it's a manager or whatnot. But also can refer symbolically to the idea of death, because we believe that our lives belong to us, right? So death is a kind of thief. In any case, they're engaged in this conversation, and the Joker says there must be some way out of here. Now, out of here is interesting. Remember the title that we have all along the Watchtower, and whether there's an invasion or a threat, of some kind. There's clearly some discomfort about being wherever here is, and a desire to get out. So whether it's a kind of metaphor of hell, or being trapped in a system that one doesn't want to be involved in, a tradition, or a mode of existing in a particular economy, or having to do certain things to be a part of that economy, or whatever that might be, one wants to get out. And of course, when this idea of getting out, there's a getting out alive, right? Always in Bob Dylan, like you want to get out, but you don't want to get out at any cost. You want to get it out alive, right? Excuse me. So there must be some way out of here, said the Joker to the thief. And then presumably this is still the Joker speaking. There's too much confusion. I can't get no relief. And then presumably that with that abstraction, these words that follow are an attempt to clarify what that means. Perhaps what confusion means, and perhaps also the relief that can't be acquired, what they are. And so businessmen, they drink my wine, and businessmen has certainly a lot of connotations, and for Bob Dylan, perhaps that if it is personal in that sense, perhaps it is a relationship to the economy of music making, and Hendrix certainly had that relationship too, and we've already talked about that relation, and we've talked about the relationship that he had to Warner Brothers and to the music industry in a very detailed way, in the pieces that I have, that begin to discuss his performance at Woodstock of the Star Spangled Banner, and the reaction to that performance. And there's an interview on the Dick Cavett show in which Dick Cavett asks Hendrix all of these questions, and the talk turns to depression, right, and breakdowns, and Hendrix clearly defines depression and what he refers to as his breakdowns. I don't remember if he says that he has had 3 or 2 or 4. Since he's been in the business, but he clearly defines them as a result of his relationship to the business, right? And the business was drinking Hendrix wine just as significantly as it was drinking as Bob Dylan's, and both of them in variously different ways had difficulty doing the creative work that they wanted to do within an industry that was, more driven by the accumulation of wealth than by, creativity or statement, right? So businessmen, do the drinking of the wine, and the wine may be the creativity or the writing or the lyrics or the songs or the work or could be, beyond that, more. An idea of if we make it mystical and religious, wine is often a part of a sacrament, right? And so it belongs to a broader social sphere and idea of belonging, and even to rites of passage that enter into this realm of the transcendent, and wine always in some sense represents transformation, because it's the transformation. It's alchemical, right? It's an alchemical substance, and we're doing an alchemical reading of dream symbolism in relationship to Bob Dylan's open letters, and And so it's important, I think, to call attention to, like, whatever it was transformed from. When Jesus transforms water into wine, that's quite a miracle. But even the transformation of the grape into the wine, as a writer like Keats recognizes in one of his poems, is a kind of magical transformation in which the season of summer, right, can be granted in across time, and not only to the poet, but to whomever imbibes this transformed liquid, right? That something is in the same way that the transformation of pollen, into and the nectar of the flower into honey by the bee is an alchemical transformation, and that challenges, right, the deleterious effects of time upon the living, and in that sense represents transformation as rejuvenation and renewal. One of the primary semantic domains of rites of passage and seasonal understandings of human economy, right? And so the irony, of it, these businessmen who don't even know, what this wine, might represent, drinking it, is clear. Dylan's very clever in these kinds of ironic turns. Now, the plowman is something different, because plowmen really, do dig the earth, right? And then there's something different between this signifier businessman and plowman in the lyrics. Seems to come closer to the working people, or the populace, the people as belonging to the earth, and what do we dig the earth for? We plant the earth so that we can grow crops, and we dig for potatoes, and plowmen dig my earth, and he becomes the source here, and perhaps and perhaps in both a kind of feminizing, because typically although Bacchus can be the god of wine, or Dionysus, and that's a male figure, but particularly when we move to Dylan being the earth, there seems to be a movement toward feminization of the poet, I would argue, in her movement toward the earth goddess, at least as he digs deeper into the meaning of what his work represents. Okay, none of them along the line, and presumably the line refers to a lot of things, like could be the line that the plow creates in the ground, but it also relates back to the line of the watchtower. If we imagine this watchtower as belonging to a tower on a wall, right, and which is being threatened from the outside by some invading force, whatever metaphor that might refer to, right? So the line represents that perhaps that wall, or the line that they're holding against the threatening forces, but also this line that was just drawn in the earth, by the plowman, and perhaps to the idea, meta-lyrically or meta-poetically of the line as the line in verse, right? None of them along the line know what any of it is worth, right? So interesting, from this kind of doubling aspect that we have in relationship to the title. So clearly, none of them, belong both to the plowman and the businessman who don't know what whatever the wine is and the earth is, the work that is mine, or the source, that comes from me, has a value, and that value remains misunderstood, right, by all, and that's part of the inner logic of that first stanza. But then the framing idea of the watchtower, right, gives it yet another level of meaning in which none of them along the line of the watchtower, know what they're defending, right? Know what the value of perhaps home is, or what the value of the deeds of watching is, or watching out, and wanting to get out of the whole business. And again, if we understand it as the business of art and music making, on one level at least, that certainly belongs to both the life and the death of Jimi Hendrix, and that may be part of the pointing to this particular song, and that Dylan's desire or need to get at both his understanding of it and his actual relationship as subscriber, as sub-writer of this story, or belonging to the way that Hendrix was able to write the story and unable to change the terms of the story in a certain sense, right? All right, so let's focus on the part of now. Unfortunately, I can't play the Jimi Hendrix because Warner Brothers will then claim copyright ownership of it, and attempt to kill him one more time if I play it. So you have to take my word for it. But the only part of the song that whose lyrics Hendrix changes are well, other than making it more like black dialect, right? So it's not clear whether he said the Joker to the thief, or say the Joker to the thief, right? And I believe that both endings for businessmen and plowmen are I don't want to use the word worried, but they're ambiguated in a certain way that leaves open an interpretation of the way that he reads the lines as belonging to Black English, and so brings it closer to a tradition of the blues, and then of course the way that he formally modifies the way that he plays the song does the same thing. So so I wouldn't say that he actually necessarily urbanizes the ballad and takes it completely out of the folk form to which it belongs, and to which at some point via the band Bob Dylan was struggling to get out of, right, with his electrification that was so rejected by both the plowmen and the businessmen, right? Who the plowmen wanted the return to the folk music and this kind of mythos of the earth, and businessmen always want what they want, which is just cash, cold hard cash. And but there was a time when Dylan would play with the band and get booed off stage, and well, he doesn't really get booed off stage, but he would get booed, and they would stay on stage and complete the set. So all of that, kind of part of the prophetic quality of the song, along with, perhaps, the prophetic quality of the way that it's, taken up by Hendrix. But the lines that Hendrix changes are these two and I don't want to argue the point, being unable to play them, but you can get a copy of the song and listen to the way they're played on Hendrix's version on Electric Ladyland. And there are a couple of ways to interpret the lines, but none of them can be interpreted as none of them along the line know what any of it is worth, right? And the way that it's interpreted on this site is none will level on the line. Nobody offered his word. And I think nobody offered his word is perhaps correct. I mean, there are no... interestingly, the two lines that Hendrix changes are not as articulately transparent as some of the other lines that he utters that are unchanged, right? But I don't recall it being none will level on the line. I recall it being nobody. But maybe I'm mistaken. I'll listen to it, and then but I won't play it. So we're gonna have to break. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I don't want to be censored by whoever believes they own the copyright to this song, and then I'll return and I'll offer interpretations of or suggestions for what the possibilities are. But the transformations are interesting because it's no longer about worth. It's about a contract, right? Or offered his word, or a kind of a performative gesture, a promise. And level is an interesting, if that's what in fact the transformation is an interesting transformation of just being along the line, right? Being along the line is being part of the wall of the... None of them along the line, none of them along the wall of the watchtower, understood, the value of my work. And then in Hendrix, none will level on the line. Well, level on the line is already like very... It's not really an idiom. It's somewhat quirky. It seems to belong to like a number of different idioms. Like leveling is like telling the truth, right? So none will level on the line. Well, what's the line? Like the line could be a lot of things here. Could be the line upon which you sign, your signature. It could be the line, whatever the argument is, right? None will level on the line. Or if we go back to Dylan and imagine those lines as, either those disenfranchised, waiting in a soup line, although, it's pushing it, but he has other songs, other kinds of ballads that reference stuff like that, or waiting for a train, or, but leveling, perhaps like a figure like Tell It To Me Straight, level with me, right? None will level on the line. Nobody will tell me straight. And then that's repeated perhaps, in the second rewriting of the verse. Nobody offered his word. So it's different from Dylan in the sense that Dylan is saying that, maybe Dylan has the contract, but people just don't get it, right? Or there's something like deeper and you don't get it. So implicitly there's a criticism of lack of understanding. And in the Hendrix, what's interesting is that drops out. And what he emphasizes is the lie, right? The lie. No one will negotiate with you about the truth. Nobody offers his word. And but then let's go beyond that. Like what beyond offering word as promise, could offering word mean? And perhaps here this is the most interesting transformation at the metaphorical level. So where Dylan is saying nobody gets it once the creative act is conveyed and the deeper meaning within it. Nobody got it, right? They drank it and they plowed it, but they didn't see its worth. But the worth was offered, right? Like the pearls were cast. It was the swine's fault that they didn't get it. But here, there wasn't even a poet, maybe, right? Nobody even offered the word, his word, right? It's a male poet. Nobody. So, nobody perhaps replaces Orpheus. And again, like, we have to imagine that here, Hendrix is the subscriber of this song, because it's not his, it's Dylan's. But here in these two lines, he's the scriptor. He is the writer, because in transforming them, right, he offers something else. So again, there's a paradox in that the failure to offer his word is precisely where Hendrix offers his word. And then even, I would argue, even the hey hey is a rewriting, and and it's a characteristic exclamatory move on Hendrix's part. These exclamatory interjections to mark rhythm and underscore certain moments and to provide a kind of like exclamation points and punctuation marks, utilizing. And here's another one down here. But these are moments of change, and I want to move on and interpret more about this act of Bob Dylan's pointing to this song. But we're exceeding the limit of an hour, and as my subscribers know, that I have very difficult time getting anything up onto the YouTube channel that exceeds that amount of time. So we're gonna have to break or split or divide here and come back to this interpretation of the number 15 and what it might mean in terms of its relationship to Hendrix, but also to what I've been hinting at, to this volume of Jung's, this essay of Jung's, dream symbolism in relation to alchemy, and specifically to what may be one of the unconscious motivating factors for Dylan's, pointing to an indexical, attempt to point to Hendrix and as playlist number 15, but also to this song All Along the Watchtower, and how it seems to be, motivated by an unconscious desire also to point to the 15th section of Carl Jung's dream symbolism in relationship to alchemy. The 15th dream, I'll just read it here, but we won't have time to interpret it. I'll have to, as I've already stated, because we've exceeded our hour limit, we'll have to break and return, to the way that this 15th section and this dream within the 15th section seems to relate to Hendrix and perhaps Bob Dylan's relationship to Hendrix, in a number of different ways. Here's the dream as it's described by Jung. The dreamer's mother is pouring water from one basin into another. The dreamer only remembered in connection with vision 28 of the next series that this basin belonged to his sister. This action is performed with great solemnity. It is of the highest significance for the outside world. Then the dreamer is rejected by his father. And the only point, that I want to underscore here, before we break and engage the interpretation in a lengthier and deeper way, is the idea that there's in Jung's reading of the father as traditional, right, and conventional spirit, against which the son, often in Freud, the significance of the break with tradition or convention is a matter of the rebellion of the child as an acting out of the murder of the father. But what's significant about this dream is that it's the father that is the agent of the rejection, right, and excludes the son. And in that sense, it's much more like the story of Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix than the Oedipal drama is of this son who attempts to usurp the place of the father. It's rather that that Bob Dylan's wine is in being unappreciated, and the earth that he plowed in being misunderstood, it is rejected in a certain way, just like his electric work with the band was rejected by both audience and business alike. And when Hendrix changes the lyrics here, if we have that in mind, like that it's the rejection of the tradition, the rejection of the convention, that he's expelled from, right, rather than attempting to castrate or murder or undermine, then the understanding of a lack, right, of truth, the lack of ability to negotiate the contract, the lack of signature, the lack of the what should be acknowledged as a birthright, a kind of birthright, perhaps. You do the work and you receive the rewards, and the unfairness, right, of the system, right, is exposed in the transformation of the lines in a way that doesn't exist there in the Dylan, where Dylan is like merely bemoaning the fact that like he's a great poet and no one really gets it. But in the Hendrix, the claim is much more powerful. It's that he couldn't receive a fair contract to begin with, isn't it? And especially if anyone buys my argument that that one can perceive, right, a kind of a dialect transformation that Hendrix offers, in particularly the way that he reads the words businessmen and plowmen. Then this transformation is in itself, right, political, and belongs to this reading that I've maintained for decades of Hendrix, is that in fact he becomes a more political and socially relevant lyricist as he moves along and develops in the short amount of time that he does, because he dies too quickly, in his case, suicided by society, not as in the case of Eric Dolphy, murdered by it. But that, just introducing that idea before we move into a deeper reading of the relationship between this section 15 dream and what it means, and how it perhaps informs Bob Dylan's interest in Hendricks' undertaking of All Along the Watchtower, and why he's trying to point to that as a specific space-time travel communication coordinate act of discursive engagement, and what he might be in fact hiding from himself in offering other reasons for subscribing and desubscribing to our channel to reach this number 15.